Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 522 of the Juicebox Podcast. Perhaps you remember episode 376, where Zoe came on to talk about being the sibling of a sister with type 1 diabetes. Her sister's name was Roxy, and Roxy threw Zoe right under the bus and right onto the Juicebox Podcast. So I thought it was only fair to get Roxy on to hear her side of the story. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. I have to tell you, I enjoyed speaking with Roxy so much that as I'm thinking back on it right now, I don't know what we talked about. I just remember having a good time. So that can't be a bad sign, can it? If you're looking for the Diabetes Pro Tip series or the Defining Diabetes series, they're both available at juiceboxpodcast.com and at diabetesprotip.com. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. A great organization doing wonderful things for people with type 1 diabetes. Please learn more about them on their Facebook page, their Instagram page, or at touchedbytype1.org. While I have you, I'd like to remind you that if you're a U.S. resident living with type 1 diabetes, or a U.S. resident who's the caregiver of someone with type 1, the T1D Exchange is looking for you. They'd love for you to participate in a quick survey that can be completed in just a few minutes right on your phone, your tablet, or your computer. After you finish the questions, they're super simple. I did them in about 7 minutes. You will be contacted annually to update your information and to be asked further questions. This whole thing is 100% anonymous, completely HIPAA compliant, and does not require you to ever see a doctor or go to a remote site. And every time someone completes the process using my link, the podcast benefits. So if you're looking for a way to help type 1 research, the podcast, or both, nothing could be easier or more beneficial. Please just go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox. When you get there, click join our registry now and complete the survey. It's that easy. Past participants like you have helped to bring increased coverage for test strips, Medicare coverage for CGMs, and changes in the ADA's guidelines for pediatric A1C goals. It is difficult to find people like you to fill out these surveys, and that's why the T1D Exchange has asked me to ask you. Hello?
Hello?
The only thing that stops me from singing Roxanne is that it is dated, would call you a hooker, and I have a terrible singing voice.
You know, you're not the first one to react to that.
I stopped myself from doing it. I was like, I sing so poorly that it would be disjointed. Yes, that's right.
I know, I don't know what my parents were thinking, but I go by Roxy for that very reason. Although then, like, when I was in college, I would get all these, like, Roxy strip club things under my dorm door. And I was like, this is not any better. I don't know.
It means every person who walked by one of those handbills was like, oh, Roxy. Yeah, I'll take one of those. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Charming.
Yes. This horrible place makes me think of my friend.
Yeah, exactly. College students, man. Oh,
lovely. Well.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, we're recording already because I'm just getting the sound set up. But
sounds good.
Now'd be a bad time to come out for something weird, you know.
Okay, I'll keep it together.
Because if it was too crazy, I'd be like, I have to keep this in.
I'm surprised you're able to do this over Zoom. It's really cool. I was like worried that I wouldn't have the right headset or something because I don't have headsets anymore.
I have to be honest. The fact that I'm leaving this all in the podcast, the little amount of effort that I put into setting up the recordings and how well 99.9% of them go is fascinating. Because what I do is, my wife asked me one time, like, why do you book appointments out so far in the future? I was like, because it gets me the people who really want to be on the show. Mm-hmm. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you know, anybody can say, yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. and then follow through. I'm like, somebody who can tell you in December that they're willing to record a podcast in June really wants to be on the podcast, and they'll put the effort in that's necessary.
That is fascinating. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm definitely that type.
See?
Wow.
I weed out the shitheads this way. And so
and I really hate it when people like are my husband calls them it's like no second responders or something. Like they send an email like, do you want to do this? And you write back, yeah, and then they just kind of ghost at that point.
Yeah. It's because they're trying to get something going. And I have the luxury of having content. So I'm not running around crazy looking for somebody. It's also why you don't probably turn the podcast on one week and just go, ooh, filler. Because I don't have to do filler because I'm literally recorded ahead. I say it once in a while, but we're talking in December. Yeah. And I think if I drop dead today, the podcast could keep going to like mid-June probably.
Wow.
So
I think my sister recorded with you in January, right? I think that's right. Because I remember I was flying, Scott. That's how long ago this was. And I was waiting to board the plane. And I went on a trip for work in January. And I heard that interview with one of the, I'm forgetting her name now, but the person who spoke about how worried she was about her younger, I don't remember if it was a daughter or son, her younger child, and feeling neglected. And I was just laughing to myself. And I remember sitting there in the airport lounge going, I got to get Zoe to do this because she will prove quite the opposite.
I'm fascinated that you don't have or that you have diabetes, that your sister, that you were like, hey, get on this podcast. And she's like, okay. And then she comes on and she's like, one of the first things she said was, I don't really know anything about Roxy's diabetes. I was like, well, this will be fun. So
that was mean of me to do to you, but I was very curious what she would say.
It was interesting. She's like, I don't really know much about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did it bother you as a child? Not that I remember. Okay, great. We'll just fill the next 58 minutes with something different. But no, I think seriously, it was good for people to hear, because I think if you're a parent, especially of younger children, it's a real concern. I can see that, doing this thing is going to make the other kid feel like you're not paying attention to them. But I don't think for the most part that is actually what happens.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, at least in our case. Well, as it was very clear. I think it was interesting for me, though, because I think a lot about sort of how having diabetes has impacted my mental health. And I'm blessed to be a very, very mentally healthy person. I think I don't have a lot of, I don't suffer from depression. I'm a little on the high strung side, but I don't think it's anything clinical. But even so, I think it's had a lot of implications. But what's interesting to me is how it stopped with me and my parents. I don't think it kind of, rippled out beyond that. So, and my sister certainly proved that when she talked.
I'm stopping myself from laughing because you just described yourself as not clinically high strung.
Yeah, exactly. I'm probably somewhere in the, anxiety spectrum, but I don't know if I would qualify for anything. I've been to a therapist before and she was not terribly helpful. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to stick with
it's such a great 70s. It's just a great 70s phrase is all. That's she's just a little high strung. Don't worry about it.
I know that. I'm sure that's something I picked up from my parents. That sounds like, yeah.
Oh, I'm 100% sure this is what happened. Yeah, that's why I'm
literally. They're you're just a little high strung, Rox. It's fine.
I'm picturing your mother in a dress on a plaid sofa going, oh, why is this one so high strung?
I know. Totally. Oh my gosh.
So let's dig in for a second. All right. You're the person, and you'll forgive me, I get a lot of emails. But for about 2 emails over the last year, you and I have been married. You've corrected me twice. That's you, right?
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
I miss
about social justice-y type things and environmentalism.
Yes. Yes. You've corrected me a couple of times.
I'm that person. No, I wouldn't say corrected. I was just sharing with you about cow farts and what was the other thing? Oh yeah. I guess I was pretty worked up about.
You really didn't like the way I spoke about. So I must have used I really kind of thought about what you said, and I feel like it was just maybe one sentence in the middle of an hour that you didn't like, but you particularly didn't like it. And so it's interesting for me because I don't know what I think about everything. So sometimes you'll hear me talk through it.
Which I love. Yeah.
Except,
that makes your podcast great.
Yeah, except you didn't like the way I talked through this one thing, and then you wrote me a long email about it.
No, I think I wasn't. I honestly don't even remember.
Well, good. Well, I'm not bringing it up then. That's fine.
Okay. I won't. Yeah, I greatly appreciate the way that you think about things. And I also appreciate that you're able to kind of like walk a line in terms of not getting too political about stuff. But as you can probably tell, I'm a very high-strung person now. I'm a very like outspoken lefty, I guess. So I often am like keen to speak up about things that, especially when I know people are well-meaning and good at listening and learning, because I think I definitely feel that way about you. So that's the reason that
I would say
emailed you about things.
Based on the first email, I'm guessing, and I have no idea, but I'm going to put your age about 20 years my junior. Are you in your 30s?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not because of your age, it's because of generational stuff. Like there's just I so wish I could play you an episode that I recorded years ago that I'm not allowed to put up. So I recorded this great episode with this type 1 whose partner was, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to say it. This is how old I am. They don't, I guess they don't subscribe to a gender certification. I don't even know any of the phrase and the terminology to use, right? But there was like a lot of like
gender non-conforming, probably.
Yeah. And I tried so hard, and she did such a great job of explaining it to me. And I really did pick through it. But then at the end, these people were traveling internationally and were genuinely scared for people in other countries to know about their, how they think, how the one person in the relationship thinks about their gender. So she asked me not to put it up. And so I never did. But it was really interesting because as I'm like, wait, she, them, he, like there was like a Z. I just couldn't. I was so, Roxy, I tried so hard.
It's so funny. I've actually wondered if you will ever interview somebody who's gender nonconforming and how you would find it.
Well,
it's so weird that you bring that up. That's so funny because I think, when was it? Somebody referred to their partner and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're like, or I don't remember what happened. On one of the episodes, I was kind of like, oh, I wonder if they just like if they use they, for instance, as their pronoun. But yeah, it's tricky if you haven't been surrounded by people that you love that
I swear to God, it has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with my desire to not.
No,
say
exactly.
It.
Yeah.
My brain can't my brain can't follow it. It almost felt like she was holding up a piece of blue paper and telling me, this is red. Every time I show you this, tell me it's red. And my brain would go, blue. I know I'm supposed to say red. And then but she did such a good job of explaining, like I said, how her partner thought of things. Mm-hmm. And then at the very last second said, please don't put that up. And I was like, it was so many years ago. It was like my old microphone, a different room where I recorded. So this was a really long time ago. It's a number of years ago. So it was not even like in 2020, somebody was like, hey, please say they or something like that. It was sort
of before people like put their pronouns in their Zoom names and stuff.
Yes, these people were ahead of the curve is what I'm saying. And so I would, anyway. That's how sometimes I feel when I'm talking about social stuff. Like I'm on what I think is the people's side of most ideas. I mean, if I'm being honest, I think I'm on the common sense side of ideas. That's how I try to think about things. I don't have a real, like if somebody from my political party says something ridiculous, I don't think, all right, well, I'll get behind it because I'm on their team. I think,
we need more people like that, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I think my husband is from the UK and he's very interesting because he's very progressive, very lefty as well. But he kind of points out to me how the sort of language of wokeness, for lack of a better word, is sort of a very American thing and a very like college educated, liberal thing. And he, I think, gets a little bit irritated by some of the language. and so I don't know, I was just having a conversation with him last night about a project that I'm working on that's an international project. And we were trying to be quite deliberately inclusive by recruiting more people to work on this project that are not white people.
Yeah. No.
And one of the people who is Swedish was kind of pushing back and kind of basically conforming to a more sort of colorblind approach of like, we're nice, we're inclusive, it's fine. And, and I was sort of saying, well, no, we need to be, this doesn't happen by osmosis. We really need to like put ourselves in an uncomfortable position, potentially to recruit people, like to actually kind of value that as something that we're recruiting toward our group. And it was a very kind of tense back and forth where we were kind of agreeing, but I think some of the language got in the way. And so I'm quite conscious of that this isn't like, you're not going to kind of get people to think about these issues by being kind of jargony and I don't know, abrasive. So I definitely understand that it's super important to have people who are well-meaning and want to learn. We all just need to be a little bit humble and open-minded. And I think you're amazing at kind of talking about how you've evolved and how your thinking is changing about diabetes and about other things. And so, so I just feel like,
what's the point of learning something if you're not going to apply it? That's, kind of like either find a level and just sit there and coast to the end and just be like kind of comfortably numb and happy. That's fine. But if you're going to learn something, then don't go, oh, that does make more sense. But I have these deep-seated, long-held beliefs, so I can't really do anything different. I also don't think forcing people is the way to go either. There was sometime in 2020, I'm bad with time, but it was sometime in 2020 on one of the social media platforms around diabetes, there was a big dust up about race. And then the push came to like amplify Black voices. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And then I went back and looked at my podcast and I was like, I've had a lot of Black guests on. Actually, a number of them, nobody mentioned what color they were while it was happening. And you probably don't know. And I thought, I'm not going to just run out. I thought it felt to me insulting to just run out and go, hey, you're Black and have diabetes. Can you come on the podcast? I'm like, I'm not doing that. And then I
think, sorry, go ahead.
No. And then I looked and I like 6 weeks prior, there was I had a guy on who was Black. He was gay and Black. I was checking all kinds of boxes. and it wasn't, by the way, I didn't have him on because he was gay and Black. I had him on because a friend of mine said, hey, he's a really interesting guy. You should have him on the show. And I was like, cool. So I did that. But I watched every other diabetes platform run to Black content. I was like, I don't really think this changes anything. I think you're just satisfying the echo chamber that told you that this was an important thing to do right now. I don't think you're actually touching the people you think you are. I think you're just satisfying the people who are aware of it. I'm like, you got to find the people who aren't aware that there's a problem and find a way to show them.
The point of doing that is so that you get a different perspective, right? Like, it's not just like, we want to check a box. It's like, we want to actually hear about people who are poor and have diabetes, or we want to hear. So I think if you're thinking about it, or I know I'm using your example, but in my example, we're looking at, this is kind of a very niche interest, but this is, we're looking at technical art history. And so, and doing a journal that talks about that.
You
so
fancy white lady, what's going on over there?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, wow, it is so white. I mean, this field is, and it's publication as well. So it's like, a real example of a situation where, historically there has not been a lot of, discussion of, like, for instance, graffiti art, or like, a lot of archaeological object. Like, there's a lot of places that we could go with this, that we could also just kind of talk about white male painters that are in museums. So it's like, I think you're right to have sort of more goal-oriented approach where you're like, I want to talk to somebody who has this particular experience. And I think you do a great job of recruiting pretty diverse voices, but maybe in general, I think the people that are more type A are the ones that are going to get on.
Well,
I don't know. So we do have a lot of, like, moms that are like taking care of their kids and stuff, which is really awesome to hear their voice. Like, it's not like it's one or the other. And you talk to so many people that I think you really do get a very good cross-section of society in general.
Well, I like talking to the mothers who are real type A because
they know their shit.
Well, first of all, they either really know diabetes, or you can kind of gracefully and gently show them that maybe they don't need to be so high strung about this thing right here, right uptight about this thing. And it gets so the people listening get to hear, hey, she was right on being concerned about A, B, and C, but she could have let go of, D, F, and G. And because there are people who are worried about things they don't need to be worried about. And you hear it if you listen long enough. I really do think that worrying about things you can't control is a bad idea. Like for yourself, for management of diabetes as well as, your soul. So there's a lot of things I try to sneak into the podcast, but I'm just saying that, listen, I've had on people from like every diverse nature, and I've also turned down people. I've turned down every color and everything that you can think of because they seem crazy to me. And I'm like, crazy person. I don't look at them and go, white crazy person, black crazy person. I just go, that's a crazy person. No, you can't come on. And by the way,
gosh, now I'm feeling very honored. You didn't think I was crazy after all my emails?
Roxy, sometimes my next sentence was going to be, I let a couple crazy people slide through because they're fun too.
I promise I'm not crazy.
I'm having a lovely time speaking with you.
It's really funny. I actually, one of the things I was like, because, I was like thinking about things I would be interested in talking about. And then I was like, okay, Scott totally doesn't want me to do this, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah,
but I was thinking about how how difficult it is to kind of strike that balance between, not getting crazy about diabetes and how much I think your attitude, it's funny, you're very, obviously very on it and have a lot of ideas and have thought through all of these things. But at the same time, I think I've benefited very much from your sort of like attitude of not worrying about things you can't control. That's something that I struggle with, I think.
I hear that a lot. Actually, it's one of the things about the podcast that I never expected that surprises me when I hear it, that just I seem calmer. And so people kind of absorb that up when they're listening. And
I think when I first started listening, I was sort of like, oh my gosh, these standards are that's never going to happen. I can't, no way. These people, this is insane. And then when I started, but then you said something like, and Arden will eat whatever she wants. And I was sort of like, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. Like there's a way to do both. That's amazing. Okay. I'm hooked now.
You know why people can't think that way? It's because everything, you might not believe this if you're just listening and you're just a consumer of audio or blogs or something like that. But everyone you're listening to, I would say, not everyone, but most people you're listening to or consuming from, I don't do this, but they pick a lane. And then just like you're talking about earlier with, politics or social stuff, they defend that lane to their death. And so they make these simple declarative statements because they think those are easier for people to follow and understand. We eat low carb. If you want stable blood sugars, you have to eat low carb. They say that, then they defend it, then they say it over and over again. It's working for them, in fairness, and it is a really realistic way to keep your blood sugar low and stable. Like, I'm not saying it isn't, but when you start saying it over and over and over again, you're selling it as dogma then. Just like people come by and say, I can eat anything I want just because I have diabetes. I agree with that too. But there are too many people eating whatever they want and their blood sugars are bouncing between 300 and 40. That's not the same thing. My daughter eats whatever she wants and we keep her blood sugar in a nice stable range. So that's why when I tell people what the podcast is about is learning how to use insulin, and then you apply it to whatever life choices you want to make. That is really how I think of it. I don't think it's how everybody takes it, but it's how I think of it. I think of it as I'm not a brand. And I'm not defending one narrow cast idea of how to manage diabetes. But that's also, it's interesting. People would think of that, content providers would think of that as an inspecific and unattainable way to create something popular. They think you have to pick this one small thing and be this thing. And I'm none of those things. And this is the most popular diabetes podcast that's ever existed in the world.
Yeah, so, that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
So,
and you definitely get that when you're listening.
So diversity in every walk of life is a good thing. Even with how you eat or how you use your insulin. Listen, I've been wearing a G6 now for about 4 or 5 days.
Oh, I know. I've been following you.
Has it been fun? I'm going to tell you that I'm as good at, my body is as good at taking care of diabetes as I am at taking care of Arden's diabetes. There are times when I look at her graphs and I'm like, hers are more stable than mine. God damn it.
The first morning I woke up after looking at yours and being like, man, working pancreases, there's something. And I had been like between like 80 and 92 all night. And I was like, hey, I'm something too. This is good.
Good for you. By the way, another example of what we were talking about, because this is something that prior to this podcast and this kind of ecosphere, I think that I've built here of people, this would have been something if I would have just popped up on a social media platform and said, hey, I don't have diabetes, but I'm wearing a Dexcom and here are my sugars. I would have gotten yelled at by everyone. This isn't fair. You're wasting the thing. I need that transmitter. Like this would have happened, but
blah, blah, blah.
Right. But it would have come from all sides and they would have piled on. But there's a really good reason I'm doing this. And there's a really valuable reason for people living with diabetes that I'm doing it. And the people who are listening understand that. I've not had one coarse word back. Everybody's just like, I appreciate you doing this. Thanks for updating it with your food all the time. I'm enjoying watching how your blood sugar right now. So my blood sugar doesn't spike and it doesn't stay up for very long. But you can see that I ate a grilled cheese sandwich. I took French bread and cut like 2.5 inch pieces of French bread, slathered it in butter, threw a bunch of cheese on it, a couple of pieces of slicing pepperoni. And my blood sugar went up about 30 points and it stayed that way for like 6 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right.
So look at that bit. Yeah.
But it was only like 120. Right. And you're
but that's significant.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not the number you should be looking at. It's the rise and the stableness of how that food was pushing so imagine if I didn't have a pancreas working, that's where you're going to get a 300 blood sugar for 5 or 6 hours. Right.
Right.
And then people are like, suddenly it fell out of nowhere. I don't know what happened. Well, your body digested the cheese and then got rid of the bread. So it stopped leaching out the glucose from the bread. And you do know what happened. Like pay it. Like this is what happened, so in this time frame where this cheese and bread is in your system, you're going to need a lot more insulin to tamp that number down while this process is happening. And if you can stop that insulin from being active about the time the sandwich is done, being active, you win. Like that's it. Like you don't have a high blood sugar and you don't crash later. That's what I wanted people to say.
Such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, isn't it great? By the way, I'm going to after this, my wife's going to put it on, and she might have pre-diabetes, so you're going to get to see that, wow. Right? And then we are going to start getting type 1s that listen to the show who want to like highlight a meal that they're good at, and then we'll do that. Like it'll pop up, and you'll get to see them do their meal.
I think that's such a cool idea. I mean, so when I first started listening, or I guess when I first I started listening around the same time as I got a Dexcom, which was maybe almost 2 years ago.
It's taken you 9 months to get on the show. So yeah, nobody has rescheduled their recording as much as you, Roxy.
Stop.
Swear to God. But go
that
ahead.
was mostly you, man.
Whatever. I'm just saying.
But anyway, so it's funny. I got a new pump and a Dexcom at the same time as my diabetes educator told me about your podcast. So I kind of have these this was like a very sort of defined moment of management changing because I had all these new tools and I had, this new information. And one of the first things I thought to myself is, gosh, I wish I could put this on my husband who doesn't have diabetes because I would just love to see what happens. It's hard to shoot for something that you don't really understand. And my doctor had once told me, oh yeah, I once went up to 180 and she didn't have diabetes, and I was sort of like, well, what, it's just, I looked for research papers. I looked for all sorts of stuff and there's nothing out there of just here's what a working pancreas looks like.
Yep.
So for me, I was so excited when you put it on because I thought, that's actually really adding to the body of knowledge. And it's not, like you say, it's not to just be nah, boo-boo, I don't have diabetes.
Right. I have to tell you,
It's obviously super helpful.
yeah, if I had a company behind me supporting what I was doing, I would, my diabetes space online, if I had a blog that was really popular, would not look like all the other ones. The other ones are just, they tell you what's coming in technology. They pick some things people are upset about and talk about that. Then they show you a lot of recipes, which it's great, and then boom, and nobody cares. And by the way, the person who helps me with SEO, which means search engine optimization, which is to see kind of how things work, picked through a bunch of really popular diabetes websites the other day, and my blog, which I put, I'm going to say 10% of my effort into, is as popular as some of them. As far as clicks go, not good for me. What I'm saying is maybe they should be doing something people actually care about.
Well, I have to say, I am a perfect example of somebody who had never had any interest in the diabetes community whatsoever until, and I think partly to my detriment, but, I was very put off by that kind of stuff, especially by the recipes, by the idea that you have to live a certain way. And I just always felt like I was failing in that kind of situation. And I actually got to the point where I was due for a new pump and I didn't know what pumps were on the market. Mm-hmm. And I realized I had a Medtronic and I almost just upgraded to the 670G. And it was really only because I live in Indianapolis, which is obviously the land of Eli Lilly. And one of my neighbors worked for Lilly, or does work for Lilly. And she and I were going for a walk, and she was kind of asking me about diabetes or what I was using and whatnot. And she was I was saying, oh yeah, my doctor says I need to get a new pump, and I don't really want to research. And she was like, well, you really should. There are all these advances coming, blah, blah, blah. And so I realized at that point I had gotten so far out of the loop, which my dad was always really into technology. So he was always kind of pushing me to get the newest stuff when I was younger. And I had kind of just settled into that. This is what I do. I'm not in touch with any diabetics. I don't follow anyone on Instagram. Not to be like a Scrooge, but just, I think you kind of talk about this as well. People, once they kind of get their routine and they've had diabetes for a long time, they sort of fall out of the spaces.
It makes sense.
And that was definitely me. So it really was the fact that your podcast is so dynamic and interesting and information, learning how to use insulin. I had never been taught that. I mean, it seems almost insane to me now thinking about it. But, I'm a relatively intelligent person. I've gone to school. I can learn to use insulin, but I had never been taught. And I don't know why I never wondered. That's the thing that kind of is strange to me. I'm so glad that you really did wonder, because
I don't know either. Look, it's funny you bring up Indianapolis, because back in the day, I've been to a number of diabetes blogger summits that were always run by pharma companies. And they'd pull together 20 or 30 people who had, I guess, popular blogs. And you would sit there and kind of brainstorm how to help people with diabetes. And I'd listen to the room and think, that's not right. No, don't do that. And once or twice I'd say something, and then I was like, no one cares what I think. And I just shut up and I just kept listening and thinking, that's not right. As a theory, I like supporting people emotionally. I think it's a great idea. But chicken and egg, right? So if somebody's down and you want to lift them up, that's great. But if the thing that's pushing them down is still there, then they just go back down again. So what if we figured out what was pushing them down and got rid of that? And what if we had to ignore that they weren't happy at the moment to get to that thing? And just, okay, we're going to ignore their feelings for a second and get to the problem. It's sort of like rushing into a car accident and a guy's pinned under his steering wheel and he's like, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. Do you do something for his pain, or do you get the steering wheel out of his chest? Right? So I just looked at the way people were living with diabetes and I thought, why don't we get rid of the problem and stop just treating the symptoms? That's just how it seemed to me. People are sad. It's just a number. They'd say stuff like that all the time. They need to know they're not alone. I'm like, wouldn't it be better if it didn't matter if they were alone? Let them decide if they want to be alone or in a community. But one way or the other, if your blood sugar's going from 40 to 300 and back to 80 and then up to 250 and then down to 40 all day long, You don't have
Yeah.
you don't have an opportunity to live, let alone try to find out why you're sad. You're sad because your goddamn blood sugar's jumping all over the place and you don't know what to do about it. Like, how is this? I could never understand. Like, I just sit in a room and I'm like, I don't know what any of you were talking about. There was always like a third of the people were just trying to figure out how to make their blogs more popular. That was interesting because none of their blogs exist anymore. And because you can't keep, it was like vaporware. Like they would say diabetes words out loud. And I'm just like, yeah, but you're not helping anybody. You're just finding a bunch of people who are in a bad place and going, hey, look over here. I'm in a bad place too. I'm like, okay, now what?
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Right.
No, I think that's an interesting point because I've thought about this a lot. So I've always had a lot of technology for the time, but I got diabetes when, there was very little technology to have. And so I've kind of seen the evolution of a lot of technology and lived with it. And as I think because I am a very type A personality, I think my parents were very aware that I was, very keen to achieve as a child. Mm-hmm. And I think they were slightly worried that I would be so focused on numbers because, I was like that kid who always got A's all the time, and would like cry if I didn't do well on a test. And my dad's like, who cares? You got to be like, chill out, Yeah. So I think coming from that perspective, I think they were quite worried, particularly at that time when there weren't CGMs and there weren't, there was no real way to both live freely and have the kind of control that we can achieve now. And I think, so I should say that I never had blood sugars that were going from 300 to 40. Like that would be horrible. And I totally agree with you. But I definitely think that I lived a little bit, I had, higher A1Cs, not anything crazy ever, but like maybe in the high 7s or maybe 8, I don't know, something around that for a good part of my childhood. And then, but like mostly I've had pretty good control. Right. But I think it's interesting now that I've got the technology because I find that my mental health is a little bit, I don't want to say worse because there's so many things that are so much better, but I do find myself focusing on it in a kind of like punitive way. And I love that you always kind of talk about like not thinking of it as a number, not just thinking of it as an information. And I think as I get better at it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that like once I saw how a perfect bolus looked, I wanted every bolus to be like that.
Yeah, well, I can't fix your insanity. All I can give you is the tools.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I'm just saying from I'm interested as a person living with it that my like, I don't know, I feel like I've benefited so much from the technology and from the information. Like I would never give that up, but it's interesting to think about like, how do you kind of balance that? How do you not just live your life as if your sole purpose is achieving a target, And I think it does get much, much easier once you've learned the information and once you learn how insulin works and you've done the experiments. I guess for me, it was helpful to think about it as an experiment, as like a kind of, I guess that story that you tell about, was it you or Jenny? Somebody was talking about just like repeating the same food over and over until you get it right.
Yeah, that's what I tell people when they're struggling. I'm like, make the same meal all weekend and just keep practicing it till you're finished, till you figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. That's been, I think, kind of changing my mindset to have that attitude has been helpful. And but I definitely have more frustration now when I don't, I just have like a couple weeks every so often where things get wonky and I have to change things. And in my logical brain, I'm like, okay, just calm down and, make the adjustments. But maybe it's just because having this going on in my body, I'm not thinking that clearly. So it's like a combination. I think almost there's a degree to which if somebody else could do the thinking for me, it would be helpful because I do get to kind of, I like rage bolus. Like, I am the quintessential rage bolus.
Well, you're saying that you don't notice it happening till it's happening. And so when you're looking from the outside, like when you're helping a child from, my perspective, I can see things coming. that my daughter would never see. Like, let's say, and this is completely farcical, no one in my house would be like this, but imagine that one day you saw a woman who was just very kind and loving, and you were able, because of years and years of perspective, to know that the next day that person was going to be very short-tempered, because that's what happens when, that day happens. This day always follows that day.
Yeah.
That person doesn't know on the happy day that it's a happy day as much as they don't know that it's a nasty day on a nasty day. They don't know that about themselves. It's not happening. I can see that happen and say, oh, okay, tomorrow I'm going to walk around on eggshells because I know that's coming. Now, sometimes I'm not smart enough to remember. Sometimes I get sucked up into the happy day and I think it's going to last 48 hours. Sometimes it doesn't. And similarly, I can look at my daughter and see situations in her personality or other things she says or does that make me think, oh, she's ovulating now. I'm going to have to turn up her basal a little bit. But she doesn't know that about herself. Like, she would know if she looked on a calendar, but she wouldn't just know because it's her. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, or,
yeah. And there are even like irrational things that I'll do. Like I've spent a lot of time thinking about like preparation for exercise. And I figured out, I have the T-Slim pump, and I figured out that I have to turn off, well, I absolutely love the control IQ. I'm like, bring on the algorithms, the more the merrier. This is one instance in which for some reason the algorithm doesn't work. So if I'm riding my bike to and from work, like when I'm coming home, I'll have eaten lunch, and the insulin will have mostly worn off, but sometimes there's like that tail end that if I then ride a bike, it'll just, completely tank. And so I know I have to turn the insulin. I have to like temp basal back. And this is super annoying about the control IQ. Nobody who's like developing this kind of technology thinks it makes any sense to have temp rates and an algorithm, because they're like, well, we have activity mode for you, so you should put it in activity mode. But activity mode somehow just like drives me up like crazy. And it really doesn't make sense. I don't know why. I mean, maybe I'm sure there's something in the algorithm. It's just a bit more aggressive than I need. Yeah. So and theoretically you could just put it on not as far in advance, because normally I'll like do a temp rate of like 50% about 2 hours before I'm going to ride my bike. But I always know, like, I'm basically going to double the power of that insulin if I'm going to exercise and I still have a little bit left in my system. But every single time, or not every time, but frequently I will kind of look at it and go like, nah, maybe this time it'll be okay. Like maybe this time the 0.6 that's left won't act like a unit and a half or whatever. It'll just kind of go away, and I'll just start riding, and then I'll get home and be low. And it's like, come on, this. And so I'll do these sort of irrational things with like wishful thinking that I'm sure if I was taking care of another person, I would never do.
The maybe this time wishful thinking, those two phrases go together so well around diabetes. It's like, oh, my blood sugars, got a little low. But it's 75. I'm just going to eat a half a graham cracker. Maybe I won't need insulin for that half a graham cracker.
Yes.
This time.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. But you do, because graham crackers are harsh, by the way, and they need to be covered with insulin. And it's but people do it all the time. Like, oh, I'll just take a little bit. I love it. I love when people can't figure out that, they ate a handful of jelly beans because their blood sugar was 50 and then ended up being 200. And then the next time they're 50, they don't just think, well, I wonder what would happen if I had a third of those jelly beans.
I tell you, I mean, some of the things I think back to when I was in college, and I would get up in the middle of the night. I had a friend who would, work really late, and I was always early to bed. But I would get up because I'd be low. And so we would sometimes like run into each other in the kitchen as she's coming in from the library, and I'm like sitting there wolfing down, the amount of cereal I would eat and then just go back to sleep. Like, I mean, it's insane. I must have been just like driving my blood sugar up to 1,000,000. I don't even know.
Well,
and I wouldn't do it differently the next time. Like, I think it's partly that like low brain, like eat the whole kitchen. But even when I'm not low, I will sometimes I sound like I'm, completely hopeless, but I'm really not. But I will sometimes have wishful thinking around things like, I'm going to go out for a walk and I don't really want to eat before it. So even though I have a half a unit on board still, I'm just going to turn off my basal and see what happens.
It's going to be fine. No, what'll happen is you'll get low because the temp basal won't catch you in time, and then you'll get high after.
I get high after. Yes, I know.
But listen, the other night, Arden's blood sugar got low, and she was, eating food to take care of it. And it was a significant, it was a persistent low. And she looks at me and she goes, "Take this from me." And I was like, okay. So I just took the food from her. She's like, "I was going to keep eating that." I was like, "Gotcha." So
she's like, "I know I have no self-control right now. Just help me." I love it.
But it must have taken me 3 years to explain that to her, because I'm not I really am not a person who wants to beat something into your head right away. Like, I would like over time for you to notice that when you're low, you're going to eat more food than you need, because you've got this feeling, your brain's telling you, basically your brain's like, "Yo, we're dying. Eat carbohydrates."
Yeah.
Right.
It's intense.
And then you have to have enough clarity in that moment to say, "I just need to eat enough here," and understand what enough is. And in a world before CGMs, the common practice was just to eat the kitchen so you don't drop dead, which made sense then, by the way. But you're not in that same situation anymore if you have some of this technology.
Yeah. And I think there was, I'm not sure how my parents did it, but I think they really did raise me with very little fear around diabetes. Like, there was a real kind of, a fearlessness, a sort of like, trust your body. I'm very grateful. I've always felt my lows very, very well. Like, I wake up when I'm low. I'm really lucky in that way. So, I knock on wood every time now my CGM alarms, but, when I was a kid, I would wake up and I'd be sweaty, but I'd be very low. Like, now I wake up when I'm, 65 or something, or 70, and the thing's, beeping, but I would probably be pretty low at that point. But anyway, I was never like afraid of insulin or afraid of any of that stuff. So I think that was helpful, but a lot of like keeping that fear at bay was knowing you can just eat something and it'll be fine, and like not worrying about the highs so much, I think.
Well, I think there's a lot of good that came out of that 60s, 70s, 80s parents who didn't know any better. So they were just like, "You're going to be fine." Like I actually think the vibe of that is okay. You know what I mean? Like, the rest of it's not great, but the vibe of it is a good posture to take, I think.
Yeah. It really, I think that's what I was kind of trying to get at before. Like, my mental health around diabetes at that point was like, I've got control of this. Like, I can feel it. And we had some scares. Like, I had, excuse me, I had a seizure, like full on, went to the hospital, like passed out, all of it, when I was in 7th grade, right at the beginning of like the transition to middle school. And I did something stupid and bolused way too much. And so mostly I felt everything and it was all good. But like, my parents had a lot of reasons to be fearful, but somehow managed to kind of keep that from me. Yeah. And so I always like, I was thinking back about this and I was like, I like lived in Italy by myself up on a mountain, like 3 miles from the nearest bus stop. And I didn't have a car and I didn't speak Italian. And my parents were like, "It's cool. You're just like," nobody ever talked about diabetes when I was.
Keep her granola bar in your pocket, Roxy. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Like, and I remember I got food poisoning at one point, and I was living alone up there, and I was just like barfing my brains out, and now I think about it, and I was like, that was crazy. Like,
I think you're here to come to the conclusion that you have terrible parents, and you thought they were good.
Yeah, right. No. No, I do remember my dad being like so happy when CGMs came out. He was pushing me to get one. And I was kind of like, what's the big deal? These things aren't accurate yet. Like, I don't need this. And he's like, "Please just wear it." Oh my God. So I'm sure he was losing a ton of sleep as I was up on that mountain in Italy. But
in my mind, your parents are the reverse Beverly Hillbillies. You know that, right? From talking to your sister.
That's amazing.
Yeah. They bugged out of the city. They went to Vermont. How do I even remember that? I remember nothing about most of these podcast episodes, in case you're wondering. Like, I'll get these notes and I get these long notes and they're like, "Oh my God." And they're talking to me like, I'm like, this person feels like we know each other. And so I'm looking, because I don't want to, like, they have like such a nice connection. it does mean a lot to me. It's just a lot of
like
people
searching their name.
Well,
like
a lot of
trying to
people write, Roxy, and so it's hard to keep up. Like some people will just like drop back into my life and be like, "Hey, that temp basil worked great." I'm like, "Do you think you're the only one I talk to about that?"
See, I'm amazed you've even like kept track of my nagging emails, because I'm like, he doesn't know who I am. It's fine.
I sit down once a month. It takes me about 3 hours, and I power through all my emails, and I read every one of them. And I hate every second of it. Not about the emails. I hate the process of doing it. But I just think it's important. Like it seems important to me, and I learn a lot from them too. Like I like seeing sometimes people's fears or leaps they've made, or just imagine all the notes that have come back to me where people are saying like, "This is what the podcast is to me," and I'm just like, God, I never imagined that. You know what I mean? Like. I interviewed a girl the other week, and you'll hear it sometime in 2021 probably. And and she's talking to me for like a half an hour about how the podcast has taken her A1C so far down and it's leveling out and getting better. And I finally am like, can you tell me what part of the podcast did that for you? And like thinking she was going to talk about pre-bolusing or understanding her basal insulin better. And she's just like, it's the community. I always knew how to do all the other stuff. I just never did it.
Wow.
And I was like, what about the community? She goes, I don't know. I just wanted to do a better job all of a sudden after listening to the podcast. Just it was that simple. And I never, you could have stolen all my money in a bet right then, because I would never have bet on that as she was talking.
That's what the CDE who recommended the podcast to me the first time said. She's like, it's a really great place to find community. And I don't know if that was like a way of, as a medical professional, like being able to recommend a podcast. Or if that was, because I was like, I don't need community. It's fine. I'm cool. But then I was like, but it might have something interesting. She had a lot of great things to say. So when I checked it out, I was like, this is not really, I mean, I definitely was interested to hear people's stories, but I'm definitely more of the like, management. Give me those like tips, those tricks. I want to try it,
There's such an interesting mix of people listening. There are some people who don't care a lick about that. And or the Facebook page is an interesting place too, because the management people talk, but the other people listen. So there's a whole thread of people who are vocal on the Facebook page, which by the way, I'm really proud of still. If you ever hear me tell you I'm not proud of it, it fell apart, but it's still an amazing place. If you have type 1 diabetes, Juicebox Podcast, type 1 diabetes, it's a private Facebook group. There's like 8,000 people in there. By the time you hear this, there'll be, I'm hoping 10,000 people in there. It grows slowly. Like it's not one of these things that goes from like 10 to 20 to 30,000 people all at once. And you've just got a bunch of nonsense that doesn't help anything. It's so focused, and somebody asks a question, it gets answered. It gets answered in a way that I'm just like, wow, if I would have sat and answered every one of these questions, I would have said a lot of what's being said here. And so it's interesting to watch the proliferation of the podcast go out, stick to somebody, and then bounce back in again. It's really, I'm very grateful for everybody in there. It's really interesting and valuable for people. But at the same time, there are still people in there that I can see them. I can see that they're there by the activity, but they never say a word. It's very interesting how it works. And then there are other people who are like, do this, try this, do this. And it's just, it's a perfect mix.
That's great. I mean, that is truly an achievement, because Facebook is a nightmare.
Yeah, no kidding. I keep waiting for it to explode, but it just keeps getting nicer. And it was one of those things, I've said it before. People are like, can you make a Facebook page where we can talk? And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah. That seems terrible.
No, actually, I've pretty much gone off Facebook, but whenever I do go back on, I always check that page, because I'm like, oh, I wonder what people are up to. And it's always, I totally agree. It's lovely. It's like,
and really active too.
This resource that existed when I was a kid, I can't even imagine how good I'd be at diabetes by now.
Just jump in somewhere and say out loud what you're thinking, and then people are like, oh, move this block over. It's like I don't know, it's amazing. So, and I really appreciate that you're a diabetes educator, and all of the diabetes educators that recommend the show do so. That's another thing I see all the time. People coming to the Facebook page have to answer a couple of quick questions just so you can make sure they're like a real person, or not a Nigerian scammer, more specifically. And by the way, Facebook scamming in Nigeria is it's got to be the thing, huh? It's like their gross national product, I think. But so, where'd you hear about the podcast? And a lot of people say from their doctors.
Wow. So. Yeah, I sent the pro tips episode to my doctor who's got type 1. And actually, I connected with Jenny after hearing her on your podcast because I was like, I need a new doctor. Like I was not happy with my doctor, and she was able to connect me. She's like, I think there's a type 1 who is a who is an endocrinologist in India. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen somebody with type 1. This is going to be amazing. And it's just, I can't recommend that enough. Like just having somebody who lives with it is so helpful. But because it's so, when I think about it, I'm like, honestly, how does a doctor like even learn this? Like if you don't have diabetes or know somebody, like you really have to live with it and try things to actually really learn how to live with it. Yeah. That's really redundant, but I'm just like, there needs to be like a simulator diabetes kid that a doctor can use because it seems so impossible to learn this information without like it. I don't know. Anyway, you've said that many times, but
no, I steadfastly believe that if I wasn't a stay-at-home dad, I would be terrible at diabetes.
Yeah.
Because I had the time.
It would be hard.
I had the time, to really look at it.
Yeah.
It was just a big deal for me. Having to look, try, do it again. Didn't work. All right, why not? Look, try, do it again. And, my wife was a big help too. And like, she beat it out of me, like the drama stuff. Like I would get dramatic in my own way too. And she'd be like, this is not helping. She's like running around the house yelling, shit is not fixing this. And I was like, gotcha.
Good for her. She sounds like you guys are a good team. Yeah. My husband is like, oh my gosh, he is hilarious. He's like the most, English, cool-headed, like unemotional,
we're a great team.
Ever.
I do something wrong and she tells me I'm wrong. That's perfect. That seems to be what our team is. Just drags me forward, and then
got
I'm like,
system worked out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Every once in a while I'm like, you don't do everything right. She goes, this isn't about me. And I was like, okay, I see. It's about me. I'm bad. I got it. I figured out my place in the world. Don't worry, Roxy. I know what to do. So interestingly enough, we've spoken for about 55 minutes.
Oh my God.
You're on the show because your sister was on the show, and we've spoken about that for about 9 seconds. So maybe we should bring that up for a second.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go back to that.
Okay. So what's that episode called? It's called Zoe and Roxy's Wild Ride. Is that right?
So, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I just re-listened to it to have it fresh in my mind.
Right.
So,
and so you heard someone on the show who was worried about their type 1 sibling feeling left alone, made you wonder how your sister felt. You forced your sister to come on a podcast she knew nothing about. She was a great sport and really delightful.
She talked to you all about chicken trailers, as I recall. Yep.
Yes. She picked through my fascination with Vermont, which it's almost a perfect place. And then when it goes off the rails, it goes off the rails spectacularly. There's no way
it does. Yeah.
It's such an interesting place.
Every time I go back there, that is exactly my arc of thinking.
Yeah. I was like, this place is magnificent.
Yeah.
Why is that man's chickens living in an abandoned travel trailer? Huh.
Chicken trailer, Scott. Chicken trailer. I was listening to her episode, I'm shouting. You're going, what do you think this thing is? And you're describing it to her, and I'm shouting, chicken trailer, Zoe, chicken trailer.
Or just in general, and not for nothing, but it's 2020. Maybe an air conditioner is not a bad idea. Just get an air conditioner.
Oh, see, there my eco warrior comes out. I live in Indianapolis and I still don't use an air conditioner.
You're a freaking hippie. Really, what are we talking? It gets hot out. Just take a little of the humidity out of the air. You don't have to make it 65 degrees in your living room. Just make it a comfortable situation.
I think I was meant to live in a really hot, humid place because when it's on the in the winter, I'm like, crank up that heat. But I can deal with heat really well and then not so much cold. So I look really great when I'm like, I don't use my air conditioner.
Yeah, good for you. In hindsight.
And then it's but I crank up the heat like crazy in the winter.
I'm telling you, in hindsight, I recognize that I was about 5 minutes away from being in a horror film where my family killed me for taking them somewhere where there was no air conditioning.
That's so funny. Yeah. I can imagine that there's that horrible feeling when you realize you've paid for an Airbnb and it's not what you expected. I can really relate to that.
The whole thing was perfect. Sans air conditioning situation. Really was lovely.
Vermont let you down.
It really did. And Ben and Jerry's isn't going to overwhelm no air conditioning. That's for certain. That only lasts for a minute. Anyway, it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. Nowhere's perfect. If you came to New Jersey, you'd be horrified. But I'll tell you what, you wouldn't be hot in the summer. So there.
That is true.
Anyway, what did you learn from listening to your sister on the podcast? Anything?
Yeah, I think I was really, I think I was suspecting that she would say what she said, or, some of what she said. Like, I definitely thought I think what interested me the most, as I sort of said earlier, was that this parent was so worried about their younger child, because I kind of thought, diabetes only affects the person that it touches. Like, that was kind of, I know that's not really how it worked in my family, but my perception was like, it didn't really ripple out to my sister. And so that's kind of why I was curious what she would say. And I know that it has affected her, but I think mostly neutral, or even in funny ways, positive ways.
Yeah.
Because I think there was really an attitude of like, I don't know, I guess my mom grew up with her younger sister was born with a hole in her heart. And so she had like, really intense few years as a young kid, and even up into like her early teens, where she couldn't walk very far without like breathing really hard. And thankfully she had surgery that kind of fixed it. But I think that ethos of sort of like not pitying the person who has, got a condition of any kind, and sort of being very, get on with it. You can do anything anybody else can do. I think it was very empowering for me. And I thought, when I hear what, how it affects, I honestly think it's way worse. Diabetes is way worse for parents than it is for the people with it. Well, in a lot of cases, maybe not in all cases, but certainly in my case, I think my parents did a lot of kind of shouldering the burden for me, and especially, that kind of then like went on to my sister as well, because they were sort of not expressing their anxiety and their concern and all of that stuff that I'm sure was going on in their heads. But I think, I don't know, it certainly doesn't seem like the best sort of cushiest approach, like the most like loving, healthy approach, maybe, to be like, just, deny how you're feeling. But it's really, I don't know what I'm communicating to people, but all I can say is that by kind of having that sort of attitude that, I think you've said this before, that like you didn't want to see Arden as diabetes, you wanted to see her as your daughter, and I think my parents were really good at that. And so I never really, like, even when I went to college, some of my friends didn't know I had diabetes, not because I was hiding it. I mean, I was testing my blood sugar at the, canteen in public. Like, I've always been very open about it, but I just sort of never like identified as that particularly. And I'm not saying that that's the way to go necessarily, but it's interesting that that was sort of like how it affected me, and that my sister then felt totally fine about it. And she's not even scared about her kids having it or getting it herself or anything. Like, yeah. I have a lot more anxiety around other health, conditions for whatever reason. I think like my fear around diabetes was like, I didn't have a lot of that, but I have like, I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop in terms of something else happening to me.
I hear you.
So, it's a slippery little snake, but but it is kind of interesting. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I don't actually identify as anything. I don't even understand that. I don't understand like running around going, I'm this, I love this, I'm so about this. I'm like, I don't even care.
Yeah, I kind of agree, actually. I don't, there's nothing about me that's particularly like, that I need everybody to know. But I guess I'm also kind of lucky that I don't have, I don't know. I think there are people with like more severe disabilities, for instance, that, the world needs to know in order to kind of accommodate them.
Yeah.
Diabetes isn't really like that. So,
I agree. I understand that. Like, listen, if I had, if my left leg was a foot and a half shorter than my right leg, I'd be like, hey, this is something about me you need to know. That seems important. I just mean like in general, like I would never tell somebody like I'm the fan of this team, or I really care about this political idea, or I just don't understand. Like I said recently on a podcast, I don't know if it's been out yet or not, I don't even identify myself about how I look. Like in my mind.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I heard that.
I'm the thoughts in my head. I don't really think about myself beyond that. Like I really feel like I'm in a vessel. I need the vessel to work, but I'm the thoughts in my head. And you either like me or you don't. And if I was taller or shorter or skinnier or fatter, I don't see why you would care if you liked me. Like that's, if you got along with the thoughts that were coming out of that's just how it feels to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Maybe this is a long-winded way of avoiding sit-ups. I'm not 100% certain. But
no, I think that like comes with self-confidence or something. I don't know. I feel like I was sort of born with not really caring what people thought about me. And I don't think that was something I cultivated. I think that was something that just some people kind of have. I mean, I'm sure you can cultivate it as well, but it's kind of a gift. It's really nice not to care.
Listen, I agree. When Kelly and I were first together, I'll never forget how she said to me one day, some people don't like you. And I was like, no, I would imagine not. And
like, yeah, I'm a person. Of course people don't like
does that not bother you? And I went, no. Not really. And then then I pointed out somebody who I thought was like a real a-hole. And I was like, what would it say about me if he liked me?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, why would I want that person to like me? I'm hoping that a person like that looks at me and doesn't see anything in common. Like, right. And that was the first time, like, that was her. Always thought of that as her, like, her Catholicism. Like, why are you not working harder for everyone to like you? I was like,
interesting.
I don't care at all if anybody likes me.
Well, I think a lot of times, like, I do think as a woman, you're often sort of put in a position where you're supposed to kind of please the people around you. There's a lot of, I don't know, I feel like there are situations in which I don't feel comfortable speaking up because I'm afraid people are going to think I'm nagging or being whiny or, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Although I do try to kind of shake that off. So I'm sure there are I think partly it's privilege not having to worry about it.
Yeah. Listen, the other day, Arden said and she meant this with a ton of confidence, no one's going to marry me. And I but she meant it proudly.
I know she's like not really on the podcast, but I just love this like phantom persona of Arden. She seems like the coolest.
Well, I'm looking at a box next to my desk right now, and it has a second microphone, and it just arrived from
oh my gosh,
from FedEx the other day. But I finally was able to. She needs hours for school to graduate. I don't know why I can never think of the name of the hours. It's such a
like internship hours or something. I don't know,
something. You have to do something like
community service.
Thank you. God, I don't know why I can't think of that. Community service hours. And she found out that being on the podcast, because she has diabetes and the podcast reaches so many people, that would count as community service hours.
Oh, that makes sense.
She just was like, oh, right, fine. And I was like, ha, you got to come on the podcast. And so she has to do a certain amount of hours. So
this is going to be great. So we're going to have a whole series with Arden?
Get like a short series with Arden probably in 2021.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome.
And she'll loosen up. When she really loosens up, then I might be like, oh my God, I can't believe people are really hearing her, because she's just me, but she's just me as a girl in a different generation. So
that's funny. I definitely think it'll be interesting to hear what she has to say. It seems like everybody's perspective is very interesting.
And I've never interviewed somebody face to face before, so that'll be interesting too.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I might be bad at it. We'll find out. Anyway.
She'll tell you if you are, I'm sure. If it's anything like I was as a teenager.
She's going to be like, you suck at this. I don't know why people listen to this. That's probably going to come out of her mouth at some point. So, because sometimes the show will pop up and she'll be like, I'm like, yeah, I know. I can't believe it.
So does she really know what you're up to, or is she kind of just like doesn't pay attention?
Oh, no, she's aware.
Okay.
Yeah, she knows. I don't talk about anything about her that she doesn't know about. And, she's comfortable with people knowing, because she doesn't care. She really doesn't care. Yeah. And she knows the podcast reaches a lot of people. And that's okay with her. Sometimes she'll say to me, can you tell your people to stop trying to get on my Insta?
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, hey, I can't. I said, if they find you and you don't want to follow, don't just say no, you're a private account. Yeah. She's like, I do, but it's annoying. I'm like, okay. So.
Oh, that's funny. I would never think to do that. Oh.
Just that she doesn't.
She's a celebrity. She doesn't even know it.
She's just a woman sent this lovely note the other day about, I know Arden, because Arden was on the beginning of the Dexcom episode. She helped me put the CGM on.
Yeah. Right? That's when I was like, oh my gosh, she's like
She's actually there.
Her voice, or
barely
like
mumbling.
The Wizard of Oz.
she's like this far off the microphone going, yeah, no, I don't know. Leave me alone. I'm like, Arden, just talking to the mic. She's like, I don't want to. I'm like, okay. So, but somebody sent this
like,
really
it's
nice
fine,
note
it's fine.
to thank her. Like said, she's like, I get that you don't love being on the podcast. She's like, but you and your dad have really helped me a lot. And I wanted to thank you. And I showed her that and she's like, ugh. I'm like, this is a lovely note, Arden. It's really nice. She goes, I know. I know. I'm like, so I can't wait to see if I can coax
anything out of her.
What I hope is that she gets comfortable because I think she'll get chatty. And then that would be really interesting. That's what I'm going to try to get her to. So we'll see. And we're going to have her friend come on too.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
that sounds really cool.
Too. So that'll be nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so your sister was delightful. I'm glad you forced her to come on the show. I really enjoy talking to you as well. I have one question. If you can't answer me on the recording, that's fine. But I want to know when we get done.
Okay.
Is your sister still with that boy?
She is. So she actually was like, you can update Scott on my life. So.
Give us a brief
great.
update.
I'm glad I'm going to be helping people like think about diabetes. No, she actually with COVID, she graduated from law school, but then her move to Arizona, they told her she didn't have to move. She could just like work from Vermont. So it's hilarious because in the episode with you, she's like, I'm probably not going to get to move back to Vermont for a really long time. But it turns out that she spent most of 2020 living in Vermont with my parents. So she's living her dream. But she is still with her boyfriend who's in Boston and he's finishing his LLM. But he got a job in, I think, New York. So I don't know that I don't think he's going to move to Arizona with her. So they'll still have the opportunity to try long
She
distance.
was explaining it, Roxy. I was like, this isn't going to last. But just because
your words, not mine, sir.
But just the geography of it had me. I was
Yeah,
like, someone's going to break.
I shouldn't talk because I did 3 years of long distance with my husband who is in England and we ended up together. So
listen,
maybe us, like, Vermonters have lasting power in the long distance relationship department.
Roxy, I don't understand how a British guy and a Jew are in Indianapolis, to be honest with you. So the whole thing's confusing to me.
Oh, yeah. He's a British Jew.
Is he really?
Did you know those existed?
Where did you get that at? Do you have to special order that? How do you accomplish that?
I know they're very few, but actually I had a Jewish professor at university who was like, do you know there are only 100,000 eligible Jewish boys in Britain?
How'd you get one? That's amazing.
It was a total accident. Yeah.
You didn't even do it on purpose?
Oh, no, I'm not that devout. Whatever. We got set up on a blind date. So yeah.
Interesting.
Funny.
Does he sound like
but
Adele?
I do like the Jewish boys. So I guess it maybe was bound to happen.
Does he sound like Adele?
Adele is I think she is from East London and he's from Essex. So he definitely has like an Essex twang, which is not, the Queen's English, let's say.
I helped somebody from England the other day get their basil set up a little bit. And we just sort of, people who don't live in America, they still can't call overseas easily for some reason. I don't know. It's 2020. It's like you're talking like through like Facebook audio or something like that. And I'm trying to help her. And I just stopped and I finally said, look, we just have to get this out of the way for a second. I was like, because I can't focus. You sound like Adele. And she's like, no, I don't. And I was like, to me, you do. I'm just saying. I mean,
I think Will would object to me describing his voice as Adele's, although he does like a little falsetto. So, maybe he'd be okay with it.
I want to hear him order like a really traditional sort of Jewish meal in his British accent. Does that go weird?
Oh yeah, the fried fish. It's actually really funny is that he loves to do, you'll appreciate this as someone from New Jersey or who lives in New Jersey, he likes to do his terrible American accent. And his favorite thing to say is $2 a slice. So he'll be like, I'll have some pizza, $2 a slice. But it's like really
ridiculous.
Horrible.
That's ridiculous.
So the whole time we were driving through New Jersey when we were doing a road trip, he was like practicing that. And I was like, I'm actually going to die right now.
A friend of mine told me one time, you are so close to being Jewish without being Jewish. It's fascinating. And I was like, thank you. Actually, because I'm adopted, thought I was for a long time. Like I felt like that must have been my lineage because if you met me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can totally see that.
Right? Like it seemed obvious to me my whole life. Right. And then it turned out like my adoptive mother was from like the Carolinas and she met a guy in like Pennsylvania, and nobody can figure out who I said adoptive mother. I should have said what's the word?
Your birth mother.
Birth mother, thank you. And so no one knows the birth father. Never been able
Could
to
you
tell
do
me
like
that.
the 23andMe and see if you are in
I've
fact
done that. Nobody pops up. I do have a tiny bit of that, but not enough to explain my chattiness and my hands moving all over the place while I'm talking.
Yeah, I was saying to Zoe the other day, I was like, she had made latkes and she was put them on Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh, can you tell me the recipe? And we were joking about something, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just realized one day if I have a kid, I will be a Jewish mother. Like, that's insane.
You are already, just from the emails you're sending me, just so you know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like nagging and I like to chat and
All of my really close friends are Jewish. And because I need somebody to talk to me as fast as I want to talk. I really need that.
That's hilarious. And that definitely like translates across the Atlantic. Like my mother-in-law is definitely the quintessential Jewish mama. And it doesn't matter if she has an English accent.
I can get on the phone with any number of my friends and just like, you can just say a word out loud. You'd be like, COVID, right? And an hour and a half later, we're like, can you believe? And it just like, it doesn't end. And you realize you have to get off the phone or this will go on forever.
Totally.
Just complain about the world and fix everything.
There you go. Well, maybe that's, the New Jersey, not Jewish, but kind of Jewish vibe you've got going on is definitely like, feels like home, let's say.
It works for this podcast, that's for certain. All right. So, Roxy, we are finding ourselves in the situation where I have other things to do. And if I don't just stop talking to you, I'm not going to stop talking to you.
Well, that was very much fun. Thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
No, I really appreciate you doing this. I really do. This whole thing has been terrific. Like, there are so many things inside of the podcast that I think could be their own thing. Like Samantha's trimester as she's pregnant thing. Like, that's like, to me, that's like 6 hours of just great conversation about being pregnant with diabetes.
Oh, that was fantastic.
And I get afraid it gets lost inside of this, but there's no better way to serve this audio to people. So,
well, I think your like new initiative of doing the live boluses is pretty cool. Like, I love that you keep innovating, and I love the stuff that's kind of been happening forever. But I also think, the pro tips and it's all good. It's cool that you're keeping it moving and
Roxy,
continuing to innovate.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to guess something out loud now, right? So keep the timeline straight here. It's December 14th, 2020. People probably won't hear this till June 2021. But sometime in the next 18 months, you will see a large diabetes organization rip off my live CGM idea. Just like one of the bigger ones ripped off my Day of Diabetes idea. And I could list a number of other things, but I like being ahead of the curve, and I like thinking about how to serve.
Gotta take it as flattery, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, if I didn't have the next idea, it would make me upset. Like if it was it was my best idea I ever had, and I never had another one, I'd be like, they're ripping me off. Like that's.
But you're building the community where people feel safe to share that. Like, I never would have shared my A1C before. Like, I never would tell people that. It was totally private, and certainly wouldn't want people looking at what I was doing, how my blood sugars were moving. But after listening to, the way you talk about it and the people, how open people are, it's sort of like, I think it's really essential because you won't just get people out of nowhere to share their boluses. Like, you have to build that. So I bet that yours will work better than theirs.
Roxy, I have to tell you, you just made me feel very good with that last statement. I appreciate that very much. Because it is my goal. Like, I'm trying to do to people with diabetes what my wife is doing to me. I'm just trying to drag you out of wherever you started as forward as possible before I divorce you.
Oh man. And can we have your wife on the podcast too? I really want to hear that.
We talked about that recently, she and I, and she's like, am I ever going to be on? I was like, yeah, one day. I was like, but not right away. I was like, she's like, the podcast is 6 years old. I was like, seems too soon still.
You should just be like, when you need community service, you can do it.
Yeah. If you ever need community service, I will let you on. Go commit a crime. And then I will.
There you go.
No, she will definitely come on at some point. And now that I have the microphone, it'll be easier, obviously. So we'll see what happens. But there's
All right,
a lot of time.
Look forward to what you do. And thanks for chatting.
Thank you. Hey, could you do me a favor?
Sure.
If I ever get bad at this, will you send an email and tell me?
I'm really not a naggy person under those conditions.
I don't know how you.
But if I can foster my inner Jewish mother, I promise I will do that. Yeah.
Right. No,
maybe I should send you some more positive reinforcement when you do good things.
Oh, that I've been married a long time. Positively reinforcing me just makes me feel like I have cancer and I don't know yet. So don't.
I feel like.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like no. Okay.
Yeah, I don't. Please, when women are kind to me, I get nervous. I'm like, why is this happening? What's happening right now? They're gonna.
Well, constructive criticism is really only because you know that you can take it and that it helps. So, yeah.
I have to be honest, without the women in my life, I'd be 21 playing a video game somewhere. So it's
I love that you say that. It's so funny.
Well, it's very true. Anyway, I thank you very much for doing this. I hope you have a great holiday. And here's a little bonus for you. Today's episode is with a type 1 who works at Mission Control at NASA. It'll be up in a couple of hours. It's really good.
So cool.
Yeah, she's got a really cool story.
Rock on.
All right.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. I'm going to thank Roxy for coming on the show. She was a ton of fun and completing the with Zoe. Did you see that? And a circle. I'm making a circle with my hands and asking if you saw it. So obviously I'm tired. I also want to thank the T1D Exchange and remind you to go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Last but not least, touchedbytype1.org. Go to touchedbytype1.org right now. Just see what they're up to. Check into their programs, their offerings. It's all they're asking is for you to look and see what they're all about. Touchedbytype1.org on Instagram and Facebook. t1dexchange.org. There's a lot of links. Click on them, and I'll see you later.